You stole my ring, didn't you?
Ultra-realistic 16.9 cinematic scene. No text. A stunning young black maid with straight hair, thick legs and full cleavage, dressed in a short, youthful maid uniform with a deep neckline and hem above the knee, stands fiercely in front of a handsome young millionaire seated in a luxury office chair. She shouts angrily, her hand raised to slap him, but the millionaire grips her wrist tightly with visible anger, his face filled with rage as they lock in a tense power struggle. The office is filled with luxury details, an illuminated aquarium with colorful exotic fish in the background, elegant bookshelves with leather-bound books, a golden globe and crystal decanters on the desk. The cinematic lighting emphasizes the suspense, raw emotion, and intensity of the confrontation. In the mansion, illuminated by imposing chandeliers, where every detail exuded power and vanity, an elegant dinner would turn into a stage for cruelty. Helena, the beautiful blue-eyed blonde wife, flaunted her red dress with a daring neckline and a calculated smile. But behind the impeccable pose lay a plan. She could no longer bear the presence of Emily, the young black maid, breathtakingly beautiful, in a tight uniform with a plunging neckline and a short skirt above the knees. Consumed by jealousy and wounded pride, Helena had devised a perfect ruse to incriminate Emily in front of everyone, tarnish her image, and banish her from the house forever. The ballroom was festive, but in the air was an invisible tension, ready to explode. Dinner was proceeding with raised glasses and practiced smiles when Helena seized the moment to act. Feigning distraction, she discreetly dropped a family heirloom near the maid's chair. Shortly after, she raised her voice in mock surprise, accusing Emily of having stolen it. The room erupted in murmurs, eyes turned to the young woman in the simple uniform, and humiliation seemed inevitable. Emily, stunned, maintained her dignity in silence, but the blow had been struck. Helena believed she had won. What she didn't expect was that a silent witness who had observed everything was about to turn the tables. If you felt the power of this story in these first moments, imagine what's yet to come. Every detail holds a twist. Every silence conceals a weight. Take the opportunity to like and subscribe to the channel so you can journey together to the end of this narrative where destiny always reveals its face. The mansion's main hall was dazzling that evening. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over the long table, adorned with candles, crystal glasses, and fine china plates. The dinner brought together politicians, business people, and high society figures. To everyone, it was just another lavish celebration hosted by Alexander, the imposing millionaire with the impeccable suit and austere gaze. But behind the glitter, something darker loomed. Helena, his beautiful, blue-eyed, blonde wife, had planned to make that night the stage for her. Revenge. Emily, the young black maid, walked in and out of the salon with firm steps. Her straight hair fell to her shoulders. The black and white uniform molded her curvaceous body, the plunging neckline and short skirt enhancing her natural beauty. She didn't intend to attract attention, but her presence was impossible to ignore. Every movement was accompanied by discreet glances, some admiring, others judgmental. For Helena, this was unbearable. Her employer, at the height of her vanity and consumed by jealousy, would not tolerate a maid capable of stealing glances, not even those of her own husband. Helena's plan was clear: to accuse Emily of something unforgivable. To achieve this, she had set a silent trap. Minutes before dinner, she herself had hidden a jewel inside the hall, in a strategic location where the maid would pass by. All it would take was the right moment to accuse her in front of everyone. The smile on Helena's lips wasn't that of a welcoming hostess, but of a predator on the prowl. Alexander saw the signs but remained silent. His gaze followed Emily's every step, and this only fueled his wife's fury. He himself wasn't sure if he wanted to protect her or just observe. But deep down, he sensed something was wrong, that the poison in the air wasn't just his imagination. As dinner progressed, with toasts and artificial laughter, The atmosphere between Helena and Emily grew increasingly tense. Emily, even without knowing exactly what was about to happen, felt the tension. Instinct told her she was being watched, and indeed she was. Her every move was followed by her employer's icy eyes, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Helena didn't just want to expel the maid, she wanted to do it in front of witnesses, in front of high society, so that Emily would be destroyed right there without a chance of defense. But what she didn't know was that in that same room, there were also watchful eyes that saw beyond appearances. A silent witness, invisible until then, was about to change the course of the entire evening. Dinner progressed amid clinking bowls and forced laughter, but tension loomed large in the air like an invisible shadow. Helena, impeccable in her red dress with a daring neckline, made a point of looking the part of the perfect hostess, but her blue eyes were fixed on a single target: Emily. The young, ravishingly beautiful black waitress walked with firm strides, balancing a silver tray with champagne flutes. Her black and white uniform emphasized her voluminous neckline and short skirt, reaching above the knees, details that attracted the gaze of curious guests, but which, to Helena, represented only a threat. The waitress's every move was watched. As Emily leaned over to pour a glass, Helena let out a venomous comment, loud enough to carry across the table. Some people seem to forget their place when they receive too much attention. The guests laughed nervously, pretending not to understand the hint. Emily, her face flushed, but her posture erect, continued to serve in silence. Alexander watched from the bedside. The millionaire, impeccably suited, strong, and with neatly combed hair, kept his fists clenched under the table. His discomfort was evident. He knew his wife was up to something, but the weight of etiquette and appearances kept him silent. Still, his eyes betrayed his irritation. Helena's every word was a stab against the harmony of the evening. Helena, realizing Emily hadn't reacted, stepped up. She deliberately dropped the napkin on the floor, forcing the maid to bow down in front of everyone. "Just look," she said with a fake smile. "Even the simplest gestures can seem provocative." Some guests glanced at each other, uncomfortable. Others chuckled, complicit in the spectacle. Emily, with her usual dignity, picked up her napkin and placed it on the table without a word. Her teary eyes met Alexander's for a moment. There was no pleading, only firmness. With each new provocation, the room lost its festive glow and took on the air of a courtroom. Helena sharpened her words like blades, preparing the final blow. She didn't just want to embarrass Emily. She wanted to expel her, destroy her in front of witnesses. For that, she needed more, and she had already planned every detail of the trap she would spring that very night. The guests, without realizing it, were already caught up in the spectacle. Some whispered quietly, others avoided looking at the scene, but everyone knew the dinner would not end peacefully, and Emily, at the center of it all, held herself together with a silent strength Helena would never understand. Helena had already decided that night would end with Emily's expulsion. The provocations up until that point had been merely a warm-up, the opening spectacle. Now was the time to put her plan into action. While the guests were distracted by dessert, the millionaire's wife discreetly rose from the table, walking to the sideboard where some glasses and silverware were set. Pretending to tidy up the space, she slipped her hand into the inside pocket of her dress and removed a small red velvet box. Inside was a family jewel, a diamond ring that was recognized by everyone who visited the house. Without hesitation, she dropped it between the folds of the napkin onto the chair Emily would use when she was called to rest for a few minutes. The gesture was quick, disguised by a smile and a small talk with one of the guests next to her. No one noticed. Upon returning to the table, Helena held her champagne glass as if celebrating an early victory. Emily, silent, continued serving the guests. Her tight-fitting black and white uniform highlighted her voluminous cleavage and short skirt that fell above the knees. Her firm, discreet steps contrasted with the silent venom leveled against her. A moment later, Helena stood up again, this time with a theatrical air. "Strange," she said in a clear voice, hushing the room. "I'm missing a piece of jewelry I always wear." She raised her hand to her wedding ring, as if checking it. A diamond ring, a gift from my family. The guests looked at each other in surprise. Emily paused for a moment, unsure of what she was saying. Helena then motioned for the maid to come over. "Emily, dear, could you check under your chair? I have a feeling it might have fallen there." The young woman obeyed. As she pulled the napkin away, the diamond's shine reflected in the chandelier's light, catching everyone's attention. A murmur spread through the room like wildfire. Helena put her hand to her chest, feigning shock. "What a coincidence!" she exclaimed, reaching for the ring, exactly where our maid was. Some guests frowned, others shook their heads silently. Emily stood clutching the tray to her chest, her eyes watery, but her chin held high. She said nothing. Her silence was as powerful as a defense. Alexander watched from the head of the table, his dark eyes fixed on the scene did not hide his discomfort. He knew Helena well enough to sense when she was acting. The haste, the theatricality, the exaggerated reaction, everything betrayed the farce. Still, he remained silent, waiting. The room resembled a courtroom, and the accusation had already been made. Helena, ring in hand, looked up at the guests. "Imagine what could have happened if I hadn't noticed in time. Sometimes those who seem so discreet harbor intentions no one imagines." Her voice was honeyed, but laced with venom. Emily closed her eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. She knew any word could be used against her. Helena believed she had won, but she didn't realize that among the guests there was someone watching everything closely, someone who had noticed the furtive gesture under the table. And this silent witness was about to change the course of that evening. The moment of accusation arrived like a bolt of lightning. Helena, standing in the center of the room, held up the ring, between her fingers for all to see. The jewel's gleam in the chandelier's light seemed to confirm the deception. "Here it is," she exclaimed theatrically. "A family ring, fallen right where our maid was serving a few moments ago. Isn't it curious?" The guests looked at each other in surprise. Murmurs spread around the table. Emily, in her form-fitting black and white uniform, with a plunging neckline and short skirt that fell above her knees, stood motionless for a moment, as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The tray she held trembled slightly, but her gaze remained steady. Her heart raced, but her dignity remained unwavering. "Madam, I didn't touch that ring," he said, in a clear yet choked voice. Helena wasted no time. She crossed the table with slow steps, showing off her red dress with its provocative neckline, and stood before Emily. "And who would believe you?" she said with a cruel smile. "A maid who appears with jewelry under her chair, while everyone here witnesses the scene," the guests whispered uncertainly. Some gave the young woman disapproving looks, others simply averted their eyes, fearing involvement. The humiliation was public, and Helena seemed to savor every second. Alexander, sitting at the head of the table, watched in silence. The strong millionaire, with his neatly combed hair, had his jaw set, his fists clenched on the table. His wife's every gesture disgusted him. He knew this kind of theater. He knew Helena was capable of any kind of act to defend her pride. But he still hesitated. To speak would expose the marital conflict once and for all. Emily took a deep breath. There were no tears, just the serenity of someone who knew she was being wronged. "The truth comes out, sooner or later," she murmured, loud enough to be heard. The hall fell into absolute silence. Helena laughed mockingly, trying to regain control. "The truth?" she repeated, shaking the ring in her hands. "The truth is, you don't deserve to be in this house, and tonight will be your last night here." The guests' gazes were divided. Some already suspected the act, others preferred to believe the boss's convenient version. But amidst the heavy silence, there hung in the air a sense that something was yet to come, and that would be precisely what would change the course of the entire evening. The hall, once vibrant with lively conversation and soft music, fell into an uncomfortable silence. The glow of the chandeliers now seemed to illuminate. Only the awkwardness etched on the guests' faces. The raised glasses remained suspended in midair, as if no one knew whether to toast or lower their eyes. Helena's accusation hung heavy, and every word that echoed in her final sentences still resonated in the room like poison. Emily stood firm. Her breathing was rapid, but her posture was impeccable. The black and white uniform, with its generous neckline and short skirt above the knees, now bore the symbolic mark of someone judged not only for what they wore, but for the position they held. Even so, her dignity was like armor. There were no tears, only the restrained shine in the eyes of someone resisting injustice. The guests exchanged discreet glances. Some murmured, clearly uncomfortable with the spectacle, while others remained silent to avoid incurring the hostess's wrath. Some, however, were already beginning to question in whispers, "Doesn't it seem strange?" It all happened too quickly. Helena always exaggerates. The seeds of doubt were beginning to germinate among them, though no one yet had the courage to openly challenge the hostess. Alexander remained seated at the head of the table, outwardly motionless, but inwardly erupting. His eyes roamed over every detail: his wife's theatrical exaggeration, Emily's steady gaze, the guests' discomfort. His clenched fists betrayed his pent-up rage. He knew deep down that the scene was a farce. He knew Helena better than anyone else there. He recognized the glint of wounded pride masquerading as justice, but the weight of appearances still kept him pinned to his chair. Helena, confident, believed she was in control of the situation. She displayed the ring as irrefutable proof and used the silence of those present as confirmation of her victory. "Look," she said, raising the jewel to eye level. "Here's the evidence. There's no denying it." Her tone was triumphant, but behind it was a hint of desperation. She needed everyone to believe. Emily lifted her chin. Her voice was calm but firm, like a ray of light piercing the darkness. "I don't need to deny it. The truth always reveals itself." The sentence sparked new murmurs among the guests. The silence was no longer one of acceptance, but of hesitation. Some looked away from Helena. Others looked at Emily with restrained respect. Alexander felt his patience reach its limit. He could no longer bear to see his wife transform his own home into a stage for cruelty, not only against an innocent young woman, but against the truth he himself could no longer hide. The dinner, which should have been a celebration, had become a courtroom, and Helena was simultaneously judge and accuser of a crime that existed only in her vanity. The tension in the air was unbearable. Every second without a response seemed to prolong the suffering. The guests were in suspense, waiting for the next move, and Alexander knew that this move could change everything. His silence until then had been seen as complicity, but deep. Inside him, the decision was already beginning to mature. Soon he would need to speak. Helena believed she was about to deliver the final blow, but what she didn't know was that the thread holding her charade together was about to be cut. And it would be the voice of an unexpected witness that would change the course of that night. Helena sensed the guest's patience was already wearing thin with the spectacle, and this only motivated her further. Accusations weren't enough for her. She needed to end the evening with Emily's final expulsion. Ring in hand and a false air of innocence, she paced the room like a queen about to pronounce sentence. Her voice sounded sweet, but every word was laced with venom. "It's unacceptable," he said loudly, drawing everyone's attention again. "Robbery in my own home in front of people I trust. There's no way we can keep someone like that here." The murmurs spread like wildfire. Some guests nodded in agreement. Others avoided looking directly at the scene, feeling the weight of embarrassment. Emily, standing with the tray still pressed against her chest, took deep breaths to contain the storm raging in her heart. Her tight uniform, voluminous neckline, and short skirt contrasted with the silent strength in her gaze. She defended herself not with tears or despair, but with a serenity that disturbed Helena even more. Alexander, sitting at the head of the table, nearly exploded. The millionaire, strong and elegant in his suit, could no longer contain his indignation. His clenched jaw and fixed gaze betrayed the fury building within him. He knew his wife's tricks all too well. This wasn't justice, it was theatre. But his hesitation to act immediately allowed the scene to drag on, and every second was like a stab to his conscience. Helena, noticing her husband's silence, interpreted it as support. She turned to the guests and added, "Emily will be dismissed tonight. I won't allow a thief to live under my roof." The maid's heart raced, but her head remained high. Her firm voice echoed through the room. "Ma'am, I didn't touch that ring, and I don't fear your accusation, because the truth is here," she said, placing her hand on her chest. The hall fell silent. The contrast between Helena's theatrical tone and Emily's firm calm began to stir something in the guests. A murmur grew among them. But it all happened too quickly. "Doesn't it seem strange? She was always so polite." The discomfort was palpable. The dinner, once designed to reinforce Helena's image as the perfect hostess, was now turning into a courtroom, and without even realizing it, she herself was beginning to lose the support of her audience. Alexander felt he couldn't wait any longer. His eyes met Emily's, and in her gaze he saw something that struck him. Strength. She didn't need defense. She just needed the truth to be heard. And that truth was about to come out. Helena didn't know it, but there was someone in that room who had seen it all. Silent witness, ignored until then, who had observed the cruel performance from the beginning. And when that voice rose, there would be no jewel, no theater, no lie capable of sustaining it. The silence following the threat of expulsion was suffocating. Helena remained standing, ring in hand, her blue eyes sparkling with triumph. Emily, before her, stood erect, tray against her chest, her eyes teary but steady. The entire room seemed gripped in suspense. Alexander, still seated at the head of the table, watched as if ready to explode at any moment. But it was another voice that broke the silence. "Excuse me," said Marta, the housekeeper, stepping forward. Her voice wasn't loud, but it rang with the clarity of a bell in the absolute silence. All eyes turned to her. Helena's eyes widened, surprised by her boldness. Marta took a deep breath and continued, "I saw you drop the ring under that chair." Shock swept through the hall like a wave. Murmurs erupted among the guests. Helena paled, her hand trembling slightly, unable to hide her nervousness. She tried to respond. "You accuse me of lying." Her voice no longer held its strength. It sounded shaky, almost desperate. Marta didn't back down. She straightened, crossed her arms, and stared hard at her mistress. "I'm not accusing you. I'm just telling you what I saw, and I clearly saw you bend down and put something there before calling the maid." The entire room turned to Helena. Some guests who had previously shaken their heads in disapproval now stared at her in disbelief. The embarrassment was no longer Emily's but hers. Her wife, who had prided herself on dominating the scene, was now surrounded by judgmental gazes. Alexander stood, the scraping of his chair echoing across the marble like thunder. He walked to the center of the room, his hard expression, muscular body, and imposing presence shaking the room. He looked at his wife and said in a deep voice, "Enough, Helena. You've turned this house into a stage for lies. The shame isn't hers," he pointed at Emily. "It's yours." Helena tried to defend herself, her words tumbling out. "You're going to believe a maid? A governess? Me?" But the guests were no longer buying her theatrics. The weight of the farce was crumbling before everyone. Emily, still silent, took a deep breath. The tight uniform, with its voluminous neckline and short skirt, no longer seemed the mark of an inferior position, but of someone who bore the weight of an accusation and stood firm. Her dignity spoke louder than any words. The dinner, which was supposed to be a celebration, turned into a trial, and the sentence was already being written, not by the mistress, but by fate. The entire hall erupted in murmurs after Marta's speech. The shock etched on the guests' faces was impossible to hide. Helena, who had been wearing a triumphant smile just seconds before, was now trembling. Her elegant body, encased in the red dress with its daring neckline, seemed to shrink under the suspicious gaze. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She was, for the first time, defenseless. Emily remained standing, her uniform impeccable, her voluminous neckline accentuated, her skirt short above her knees. Her face, still tense, now showed a different glow, that of hope. The weight of bearing the humiliation alone dissolved before the governess's courage. Marta, for her part, remained firm, as if she had waited for this moment for years. Alexander stood up suddenly. The sound of his chair scraping against the marble echoed through the room, quieting the murmurs. His imposing figure, broad shoulders beneath his suit and piercing gaze, filled the room. He walked slowly to the center of the room, each step carrying the force of a verdict. When he stopped before his wife, his voice rang out gravely, "Enough, Helena. It's not she who shames this house, it's you." The impact of those words was like a sentence. Some guests sighed, others lowered their eyes. The astonished wife raised her hand, the ring still between her fingers, trying to explain herself. "They're against me, all against me," she stammered. But there was no one to defend her. The venom she had spread for so long was now turned against her. The guests began to move away, forming a circle around the scene. The dinner had become a courtroom, and the defendant was no longer Emily, but Helena. The very elite who had once applauded her now watched her with disapproval. One of the businessmen whispered, "I always thought she was too exaggerated." Another replied, "Now we know who she really is." Emily, still silent, watched everything. There was no smile of victory on her face, only the serenity of someone who trusted in fate. Her erect posture, her hands steady on the tray, conveyed more strength than any words could convey. Alexander turned to her, and for the first time in front of everyone said aloud, "You have nothing to be ashamed of." The sentence pierced the hall like an arrow. Helena, shocked, let the glass slip from her hand. The crystal shattered on the floor, the sound echoing like the end of a rain. At that moment, everyone understood. The lie had been exposed. Justice had prevailed. Power no longer rested with the wife, but with the truth upheld by the maid's dignity. The sound of the crystal shattering on the floor marked more than the end of the farce. It marked the end of the empire of appearances that Helena had taken so much pride in maintaining. The room filled. With silence, now breathed only the weight of shame. The blonde, blue-eyed woman, so haughty in her red dress with its daring neckline, seemed smaller than ever. Her mask of perfect hostess had crumbled before everyone, and in her place emerged only a woman overcome by her own venom. Alexander remained standing, his imposing figure in his elegant suit, his hard gaze fixed on his wife. The man who had previously remained silent for the sake of appearances now made it clear that his patience was at an end. "You have turned this house into a stage for humiliation," he said, his deep voice echoing through the hall. "And today, in front of everyone, fate has shown who truly deserves to be expelled." The guests murmured in agreement. Some rose silently, already certain that this dinner would be remembered for a long time, not for the delicacies or the luxury, but for Helena's public downfall. Marta, the housekeeper, lowered her eyes, but her expression bore a relief that needed no words. She had spoken the truth, and the truth had resonated. Emily, still standing, her black and white uniform fitted to her body, plunging neckline and short skirt falling above her knees, took a deep breath. There was no arrogance in her posture, only serenity. The young woman who had been the target of insults and humiliations stood firm, erect, as if she had always known that justice never fails, even if it takes time. Her teary eyes reflected dignity, and in that moment, all eyes turned to her. Not as a servant, but as a symbol of courage. Helena, unable to bear the weight of the stairs, turned to leave. Her heels echoed through the hall like footsteps of defeat. As she crossed the main door, the mansion gate closed behind her with the sound of a final sentence. The hostess, who believed she controlled everything, had been cast out not by human hands, but by fate itself. Alexander took a deep breath. He walked over to Emily, and before the few remaining guests said, "You were the only one who remained standing when everyone tried to bring you down." Those words, simple yet loaded with meaning, drew murmurs of approval. The millionaire wasn't speaking just to her, but to everyone. He was publicly acknowledging that dignity had triumphed over lies. Emily didn't respond. She simply inclined her head slightly, as if accepting the recognition without needing it. Her victory wasn't in seeing her boss humiliated, but in remaining intact. Dinner ended in respectful silence. The guests left the mansion one by one, each step carrying with them the memory of the night when truth unmasked vanity. The story of that night would spread throughout the town, not about luxury, but about the maid who resisted and the wife who fell. In the heart of the house, now filled with an unexpected calm, it became clear that fate does not bow to arrogance. It watches, waits, and, at the right moment, exacts its toll. And that night, everyone understood that the strongest power was not in the jewels, nor in the crystal glasses, but in the silent courage of a young woman who, even though she was treated as nothing, proved to be everything. Karma is in no hurry, but it never fails. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and comment. Fate always takes its toll.